You're listening to The Chronomancer and the Book of Worms, Book 1 of the Destiny of the Void Triangle. Written by Jason Harrington. Narrated by Mason Hamilton. Prologue. Macorin strode aimlessly through the aftermath of the last battle of his life. The land was parched dry and cracked. A flat barren landscape stretched beyond sight. It was littered with tall heaps of rotting corpses. The stench of rotting meat filled the hot, windless air. There were hundreds of thousands of the dead, maybe millions. He didn't know how many, honestly. What was one undead slave among so many? The Blood Gauntlets, the Void Triangle's specialist sect of necromancers, corpse manipulators, and summoners, had enjoyed an era of blood revelry. They made artifacts from the dead. They aided the masters in entering the world, and every living human was a slave in their eyes. They created shambling ghouls by the thousands, only slightly less of the crazed blood drinkers, a few hundred of the vengeful, terrifying revenants, and even a lich. Macorin kicked the burned head of a dead ghoul. Blood and brain matter splashed against his shiny black boot. His large chest heaved a sigh of celebration's end. His almost colorless eyes surveyed the ruins of the armies that the Void Triangle once commanded. His tiny black pupils, in milky white, shifted from one heap to another. He remained careful not to disturb the ash piles, as these were likely the remains of their masters, now returned to the Great Mother, Oblivion. As he looked, Macorin's eyes had to tolerate the glare of the sun. He would have liked something to strangle as he thought on it. For over a decade, most of the world was covered in perfect blackness. The darkness blocked out the uncomfortable light of the sun. During that time, his powers of shadow reached an apex he didn't know existed. His mind was so focused and clear, it felt as though he was becoming a god, with so many souls swallowed up into his will. How could he believe otherwise? Macorin looked down at another corpse, and a smile played on his cold, blue lips. The body belonged to the King of Terrell. The former ruler had been killed, reanimated, and brought halfway across the world. His final end was in the middle of the Kassaran Empire, thousands of miles and an ocean away from his farming kingdom. The entire world was so very nearly nothing more than their collective source of unlimited power. This king and his nation were the third kingdom conquered by the Order of the Void Triangle. Terrell was home to the healers and geomancers of the Earth Phoenix clan. Of the 4 remaining mage clans, they had been the second easiest to wipe out. Their greatest challenge was the Crimson Imperial Flames, the Kassaran Emperor's personal combat magi. They were violent, brutal, and well-trained. The Hellfire Imbued sect had enjoyed literally fighting fire with fire against them. In the darkness, the Crimson Imperial's fire clashed with the purple, blue, and emerald fires of the sect's annihilation worms. It was their favorite and most devastating Hellfire spell. In some places, Macorin could still see the mile-wide trenches of black glass where the worms left a path of burning destruction. In the end, the Imperial Magi were also defeated, burned away until not even their souls remained. Macorin pulled the hood of his long black cloak forward, giving his cold, pale face more shadow for comfort. He rubbed his short-trimmed auburn beard, feeling the accursed sunlight spill into the sleeves of his black tunic and onto his bulky arms. "Macorin Eternal!" came an intrusion from behind. Macorin turned his bear-sized body to face the lanky, tall shape of a youth. He was anything but the grinning child he seemed. He wore the traditional black tunic, pants, boots, and gloves. His long black cloak draped his back and down to his heels. The hood was pulled forward, hiding his colorless eyes and short, white blonde hair. "Great Mother embrace you, Hellfire Emil." Macorin greeted the leader of the Hellfire Imbued. "What brings you to my melancholy retrospect?" Emil was generally a playfully giddy pyromaniac. Macorin thought his remark would earn some crazed, optimistic retort. The boy's pale face was set and grim, though. It even seemed it would stay that way a while. "The Oblivion emissary wishes to speak with all of us," Emil answered as dispassionately as he could manage. Macorin, leader of the Shadows Eternal, nearly supreme patriarch of the Void Triangle, wasn't as successful at hiding his anger. His gloves creaked as his fists clenched, his teeth grinded. "I think we should speak indeed." Macorin usually held back his feelings behind a cold facade. It was part of his training to emulate the part of the underworld he would wield. Soul Theorist translated. Feast of Souls was a pitch-black hunting ground. There, the greatest of attacks and madness. In Soul Theorist, terror was the absolute ruler. But this last battle, this ending, stoked hot fires of rage in Makorin that were better suited for a Hellfire Imbued. I want to know why we were told to hold back against an enemy that was cutting us to ribbons! Makorin growled as he followed Emil back to the massive command pavilion. Makorin knew that his complaints would be lost on Emil. Though his fervor for Hellfire remained unchanged, something caused him to become more devoted to the Little Prophet. It happened all at once and very recently. When Makorin brought it up, Emil was at a loss for a reason. It seemed the Prophet gave the young Hellfire imbued an almost religious zeal, but took away the memory of why. Makorin wanted to know how a speaker for the Masters could perform such a flawless manipulation of the mind. After half an hour of walking around the piles of bodies, carefully avoiding the ashes, they finally arrived at the pavilion. It was several stories tall and half a mile wide all around. It was made of black material that blocked both the heat and light of the sun. Though it was as large as a small palace, a number of Void Disciples managed its location and storage within seconds. Emil turned to face Makorin. I know it all looks bleak, Makorin Eternal, but have a little faith. Makorin couldn't tolerate the young fanatic's rhetoric. Hellfire Emil, every Void Disciple is trained with the knowledge that faith is one of many illusions. It is used by those with delusion of power to abuse those they view as inferior. I expect better of you than absurdly blind devotion. Such self-abusive notions are exactly why I abandoned the Emerald Spectre clan. Do you acknowledge the goal of the Great Mother? Emil challenged calmly. Makorin blinked as if struck. The question was posed to new Void Disciples by the voices of their masters in the underworld. It was asked as a way to measure commitment. The goal of the Great Mother, the primordial essence of nothingness, was the end-all of life and death, a return to perfect stillness. Until that goal was achieved, the children of nothing, those that people called demons, were free to do as they wished, so long as it furthered the goal. It was the same for their students, the Void Disciples. That's a foolish and poorly misplaced question, Hellfire Emil, Makorin growled. My ambitions are always on the interests of the Great Mother and her goal. Do not think to take me. He does no such thing, Makorin Eternal, came a cracking voice from within the pavilion. The voice belonged to a short, stick-thin man, wearing a hooded robe so red it was almost black. His eyes were shadowed, but his mouth was a broken, toothy, cracked, endless grin. His madness was as tangible in aura as the rotting flesh and sulfur. Emissary. Makorin inclined his head in a bow. That's a half-hearted gesture from you, Shadow Eternal. Give me no respect I do not earn. Speak your mind. That was the only floodgate Makorin needed open. The Magus Warrior King sliced us to bits, and you forbid us from combining our powers to crush him. This didn't need to be a defeat that the rest of the world could seize upon. How are your skills growing, Makorin Eternal? The Prophet challenged. The question seemed obscenely out of place and off-balancing. My capacities were growing in leaps and bounds until today. Can you chasm walk? The Prophet pushed. Makorin didn't know what was more baffling, that the Prophet held knowledge that belonged only to Void Disciples, or that he was referring to purely theorized skills. The chasm walk would allow a Shadow Eternal to walk the distance between worlds. Can you sunblight? The Prophet pressed, still grinning with mischief. Do we have any who can call on the burning scour? Or the enslaving winds? Makorin had had enough of the Little Prophet. No, and none among us can cause a rain of gold, turn the moon back in the east, or catch a falling star with their teeth either. We were still powerful enough to bring this world to its knees! The Prophet's grin widened, exposing yellow, jagged teeth. His feet lifted off the ground, and he was close enough to Makorin that he could see the mad gleam in his bloodshot yellow eyes. Can you escape execution with the repulsing word? The Prophet challenged in a playful, hissing whisper. Of all of the skills the Prophet listed, that last ceaselessly vexed the Shadow Eternal's faction for more than 5 generations. It was a ward that reversed any form of death. It was a true gift of immortality. But there was a balance and precision required that was tenuously dangerous. Void Disciples always lost more of their soul to their own magic, but the loss in the ward could be sudden and total. It often left behind raving, violent husks. Their memories and their thinking could be so absent, leaving nothing of the person warded. It was supposed to be gradual, only a little at a time, but no one perfected the cost of each resurrection. So far, everyone who had cast the ward were nothing more than rabid, soulless animals after their first death. Fortunately, their madness was so thoughtless that it was easy to strip away the ward and put them out of their misery. "No," McCorin growled between clenched teeth. "Then you admit your capacity to serve the Great Mother is limited. No one here can do what needs to be done. You can silence this world, to an extent, but no other world will be returned to silence. The infinite eternity of the afterlife will never be washed away by anyone here." McCorin felt his failure keenly. He could find no repose for the Oblivion emissary. His accusations were correct. He could be a king over millions of souls, but how would that repay his masters, or the Great Mother? Just as any void disciple, the absence of his own soul created a craving to return to the Great Mother. Yet he had no viable path to attain that goal. "Take heart, Lord of the Gathering Shade," the prophet reassured, using McCorin's formal title. "If there was no solution available, I would have allowed you to overwhelm the King of Demon Slayers. Come, join your brothers and sisters, and I will share a vision that will truly renew your faith in our dark path." McCorin entered the colossal pavilion beside the Oblivion emissary. A truly monumental event awaited him.